we're really happy that you're able to join us and have a good conversation today. I think there's a lot of people in the geoint community, especially, that love to hear your thoughts and want to know what's going on with you. And I think you have a great story to tell about your upbringing through the military and time as director. So I was hoping maybe we could start there about you could tell us about how you got into this crazy world of ours.
I don't know if it's a great story. It's certainly a story, right? And I have said this at certain times. If you know Admiral Stavridis, just by reputation, retired as a 4-star. He wrote a book called The Accidental Admiral. And
Okay.
I cringed. It was a great book. It's a great read. But I wanted that title, right? Because I think if you look at his career versus my career, I truly am the accidental admiral, much more so than he. I think he was destined to be an admiral. But I spent 34 plus years in the Navy, 34 plus years, all that time in the intelligence community, as a naval intelligence officer. But I only signed up for 2 years. And I just kept staying. And every time I'd take another set of orders, my wife would hold up 2 fingers and she'd say, "It's been a little longer than 2 years, mister." But I stayed just because of the people, and the things that I was able to do, and changing jobs all the time. It was truly a joy, and a great life.
Yeah. That's interesting. You mentioned that. You signed up for 2, but then you kept going. Um, you mentioned some of the people were the driving factors. Like who were some of the people that made you make a decision like that? How did they influence that?
Yeah, I'll give you a somewhat abbreviated version of my career in the Navy. And at one point, I had the pleasure of working for General Jim Mattis when he
Hmm.
was the Central Command commander, and I was the commander of the JIC, therefore the Intel Center. And he was a great customer, very appreciative of Intel, but he always wanted to hear potential adversaries, his competitors, formative experiences, right? And so
Hmm.
I'll kind of share my formative experiences. And when you get older, you have to chunk your career out in blocks, or else it just becomes long and
Right.
boring, right?
Right.
So I came in. I was a law school dropout, for one thing. And I had a brother who was enlisted in the Navy. He was a Slick 32 operator on the USS Arkansas. And he was an electronic warfare technician. And he said, "Hey, Bobby, you should think about going in the Navy because you're a college graduate and you could go in as a commissioned officer." But because I was a law school dropout, I didn't want to overcommit, which is why I signed up with
Hmm.
a short commitment, right? It was 2 years active and then 4 years active reserve. And I came in just after the Ronald Reagan buildup and near the end of the Cold War. So I came in as a naval intelligence officer, went through officer candidate school, went through basic intel school. And at that time, we learned all about the Soviet Union and all source operational intelligence. We even had instructors that would dress up like Soviet naval officers and like strut out on stage and talk about their strategy and how they would defeat the evil empire of the United States. Because I was only signed up for 2 years, I also wanted to make sure that I got some operational experience in the fleet to see if I would like doing it longer. So I received orders to USS Ranger, CV-61. I always tell the youngsters, when you Google it, it's not the wooden ship with sails, right? It was an aircraft carrier. And I joined them on deployment. So I somehow made my way out to Diego Garcia and jumped on board the Ranger mid deployment. And we were on something called Gonzo Station up in the North Arabian Sea. And it was Cold War era, right? It was Soviet ships in close proximity, in tense situations. They had intel
Wow.
collectors trying to collect off of us. They would fly reconnaissance aircraft out and we would intercept them. And when we finished the deployment, we came back across the Pacific. We went through something called the Bear Box because the Soviets would launch long-range aviation Bear aircraft, both strike aircraft and anti-submarine aircraft. And we would launch Goose and Mav off the pointy end of the Ranger and go try and intercept at 200 miles, right, which was their weapons range.
Right.
And I thought that was going to be my experience in the Navy. And I was enjoying that. But in our turnaround cycle, while we were preparing for the next deployment, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And as a stellar intel officer, I was scratching my head saying, who is Saddam Hussein and where in the world is Kuwait? Right.
Right.
But it was a lesson in expect the unexpected, right? And adapting to new situations. So we came up to speed as fast as we could. And we made a shortened turnaround cycle, and we deployed early and chopped in through the Strait of Hormuz into the Persian Gulf the day before Desert Storm, right? And
wow,
that was a formative experience for then Lieutenant J.G. Sharp, right? Because it was constant strike operations, working with the air crew before they went on their missions, after they came back from their missions. We had a F-14 TARP squadron, so we were doing tactical reconnaissance. And it was a hook for me. And this will come back to play at the end of my career, because after Desert Storm, the Navy looked at itself hard, and naval intelligence, and said, hey, we need to invest in some deep expertise in some specific skill sets that are really important to how we do naval aviation and strike operations. And those were figuring out how we leverage machines better, right? So some computer equipment sort of savvy individuals. We wanted to have people who were smart in collections, right? So how do you make the national intelligence community know and respond to tactical edge requirements, right? How do we tap into that system that's out there? It was at the early days of using imagery afloat, right? And we were just testing out a brand new system that allowed us to receive 3 images in 1 hour afloat. That's kind of the technology we were dealing with then. And then we said we needed experts in targeting, right? Which is really bringing that together and working with the air crews, telling them what they need to do to have effects, working with the combatant commands, right? And getting information off. And to me, targeting was all source operational intelligence, right? It was built off of what I had learned thinking about finding Soviet platforms that didn't want to be found. And I really wanted to do that, so I said, I want to be an air wing targeteer. And it was the first of 3 times where people said, ooh, you don't want to do that. It's, it's something new. It's not the standard career path. And it may put your progression at risk. And I mentioned that because it was the first of 3 times that people told me that in a career. And each time, thankfully, I was stupid enough just to say, well, this is really what I want to do. But in hindsight, people that give you that sort of advice in your career do so from their heart, right? They're trying to look out for you, but quite often they're looking in the rearview mirror, and they're looking at what works yesterday as opposed to maybe thinking about what's going to work tomorrow, what's needed tomorrow. And that kind of played out through my career. So, the Cold War era, the next stage of my life was really that targeting. And I went back to sea as a targeteer for Air Wing 2. I was stationed in Fallon, Nevada, when Top Gun moved from Miramar up to Fallon, and we merged Top Gun, Top Dome, and Navy Strike Warfare Center. And I deployed on the USS Constellation, CV-64, and really enjoyed working with the air crews, being a little more senior, and a little more experienced this time afloat. So I got to do some mentoring and leadership roles. And I like targeting so much that I decided I wanted to do it again. Right. And that was the second time that somebody told me, "Ooh, you're over specializing." And I said, "Yeah, but this was tactical targeting. I either wanted to go
Right.
to a combatant command or to the joint staff." And I took orders to the joint staff, and they said, "You're over specializing." But it was a great experience, and it was my first tour in Washington D.C., my one and only tour in the Pentagon, and my first exposure to the national intelligence community and the
So
tremendous talent
when
we
they
have,
Bob, when
in
they were
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
when they were saying this to you that you're over specializing, is the orthodoxy within the ranks of naval officers to kind of just get a mix of experience and then, say you've done this wide breadth of things, but if you say, I've been in this lane the whole time, then you're less likely to get that next promotion?
Yeah, well, it's there's always this debate on whether or not you want specialists or you want generalists within the
Mhm.
intelligence community. Anyway, in the Navy, in a lot of the other professional fields, like if you're driving ships or
Mhm.
flying aircraft or driving submarines, there's a very set pipeline where you're mastering that platform, right? There's a little
Right.
more flexibility in what we do as intelligence professionals, but we've had this debate historically, generalists versus specialists, and at the end of the day, we always come to, after we're exhausted from debating this from all sides, we kind of come down in the middle, saying we need general specialists and we need special generalists. See, yeah, they're both of those are valued, right? And on the specialist, it's one of the reasons we've been expanding our warrant officer program within naval intelligence, right?
Well, I think
Um,
I think it's good to master something, right? Like if I've
yeah,
always, as a geoint person, we've always had the debates with the all source people, right? It's like, oh, you're just looking at a bunch of stuff, but really what they're doing is mastering the art of fusion, right? And the art of intelligence fusion.
yeah, and
Um, but I think
and
it's I think
I
it's
was
critical to
learning
learn
at
one.
that point
Yeah.
also, and that was my first exposure really to the geointers because on the joint staff, my door opened up to what was the NGA spaces, right? As NGA was becoming NGA, and just like I became a targeteer based off of lessons from Desert Storm, NGA was
Hmm.
born out of lessons from Desert Storm, right? And
Right.
while I was there, while I was on the joint staff, is when they created NEMA, eventually NGA. And then just to finish my career real quick, targeting became post 9/11 counterterrorism operations, which is targeting,
Sure.
which is all source operational intelligence. And when I started deploying with special operations instead of being afloat as much, that was the third time people told me, hey, maybe you don't want to do that. And then as I left, um, NGA, it was a full circle back to strategic competition, right? Not the Cold War, not the Soviet Union,
Right.
a different strategic competition, but it's a full circle for me. And it was the perfect way for me to culminate my career being at NGA.
Right.
I was a targeteer. I had been around geointers my whole career. And when I
Hmm.
got to NGA, I told them, you are my people. Like, this is, you are people I have worked with, deployed
Right.
with, been around, and I love earth sciences and earth observation. So after that, I was like, I'm complete. Right, my career was complete at that point.
That's kind of a perfect circle from Cold War, era all the way back to the world's a crazy place now, but it does seem to be kind of back to that, you know, confrontation of major powers, right? Um, but so I get there's probably a lot of lessons there we can ask you about, but I'm curious about your time as director of NGI. I always have this thought of, what is it actually like to wake up and not, to just have that much responsibility of an entire, it's not, and so people understand, it's not just that you're leading National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, you're also leading the National Geospatial Strategy as well. So there's a lot of different components to that. I'm just kind of curious, like, what was the day to day like, and like, how did your perception change once you started kind of getting comfortable with that role?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it did change over time because I was having discovery
Hmm.
every day, and I still, I'm believe in the value of life, being a life learner, and I always encourage people to grow every day professionally and as leaders.
Hmm.
And even though I had been around the agency quite a bit, I still didn't know everything the agency and the enterprise was
Right.
doing, which kept me very motivated, right? And
Hmm.
excited about
Yeah.
what the team was doing. And for some of your listeners that may not know the agency, you're right, the director of NGA holds more than one role. He or she is responsible for running the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, which is a little shy of 15,000 people,
Hmm.
um, globally distributed. Right, about 50% of it is in Virginia. About a quarter of it is out in two facilities out in St. Louis, but the other 25% is all over the place, formed
Right.
in NGA support teams and co-located with customers and with
Hmm.
teams in all the other intel agencies, with all the combatant commands, with international partners. And it's very connected and collaborative by nature, and that's a strength of the agency itself.
Sure.
But the director is also the functional manager for all things geospatial intelligence related, right? So for the U.S. government and in cooperation with international partners, that in that role, you're helping to set standards, to push the envelope
Hmm.
with new technology, tactics, techniques, and procedures, and to make sure that everybody's getting what they need to do their jobs, leveraging geospatial perspective and geospatial technology. So it can be, if you think of that, it's pretty complex, right? And it operates
Hmm.
a very complex system of systems around the clock and around the globe. To understand people's requirements, to go out and task a bunch of systems or data sources to help meet those needs.
Hmm.
It has a very complex, sophisticated IT infrastructure, right? Designed to
Right.
ingest, process, store, make sense out of data, and turn it into products at all kinds of different classification levels and all kinds of different formats, and disseminate that on multiple different communication systems around the clock and around the globe. So the getting getting to be the director, you have to empower to make something like that work. You really have to
Right.
drive decision making down to low levels and just point the proper direction, kind of give strategic direction, empower people, provide resources,
Hmm.
remove barriers, right, and be wowed by the amazing talent that we have. um, More tactical, I still went in every morning early, and it was
Sure.
funny because my wife at one point called me out on this. She said, "Hey, throughout your career, you've been saying that you need to go in early before the boss, right? So you can be prepared when he
Right.
or she comes in through the door." And she's like, "Aren't you the boss now?" I'm like, "Yeah, I am, but for me, it was quiet time. It was time
Right.
before the day started where I could read, I could calibrate, I could think before the day happened. Every day starts with an ops intel briefing, right,
Hmm.
which is designed to level understanding of what happened yesterday, what's happening today, where we need to be focused. It's recorded, right, so that people who are on different time zones can still come in and
Right.
see that. It was run by my director of operations. It wasn't run by myself or the deputy. It was really run by the director of
Hmm.
operations, so that there was some level of you know shared consciousness
Sure.
and direction. And then the day happened, right? And then we'd come
Hmm.
back and do it again. but it was designed to make sure we were meeting customer needs and properly focused. And it's not unusual. That's not. I mean, most of the agencies do something like that. Throughout my career, all the tactical operational units, you do something like that. And that was probably the joy of my day.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to split my time between getting around and interacting with customers and the disaggregated team, right? And my guidance to my planners was I wanted to be home at least 50% of the time, which I defined as having my head actually on my pillow, right next to
Right.
my wife, sleeping in the same bed. And I think we did a pretty good job of achieving that balance. But it's a busy job,
Mm-hmm.
demanding job. But the agency is just full of tremendous people, and the partnerships that NGA and all the other agencies have are truly our strength
Mm-hmm.
as an intelligence community. And it was a joy to be either in the building or out on the road with members of the community on a regular basis. And 3+ years went by in a
Right.
blink of an eye.
Well, you mentioned that, the day just kind of happens, right? And you definitely had some days. I mean, you were there during COVID, which is, at least of my life, I don't think we've had a pandemic like that in 100 years, right?
Yeah.
And, and to navigate that, and the role that you were in, and to see kind of where it's at now on the other side, is interesting. Um,
That was
what
definitely
what was
something
that? What
different.
was that experience? Yeah.
It was definitely something different, right? And I think from a positive perspective, I had been the director for just over a year at that point.
Mm-hmm.
If I had dove right in and like within the first month we had done that, that would have been hard. But I knew the agency knew me, and I knew my leaders, and we had established
Mm-hmm.
a really strong working relationship both at the agency and within the
Mm-hmm.
enterprise. So that played to our strengths. But I tell you, it was different than anything. And the thing that struck me the most was, what I guess two things. One was kind of a panic,
Right.
that was going
Yeah.
on, not unique to NGA, right? It was happening
Mm-hmm.
everywhere.
Right.
And the different nature of it, as opposed to all the other crises we had dealt with,
Mm-hmm.
was that it impacted us at home, right?
Right.
It had tentacles reaching into homes. But with the panic initially, I had a lot of people saying, "Hey, tell us exactly what to do." And
Right.
I mentioned earlier that I believe in empowering people, right, and driving decisions down to the lowest level. And I had to tell them, I'm not going to tell you what to do because we're too complex, right? Everybody's home situation is different. We have different
Right.
jobs. We're all over the place. I said, but I'll tell you what needs to be done, right? And early on, we came up with the phrase, we will take all actions necessary to protect and preserve our force and our families while continuing to meet mission critical needs of the nation. And then when people would say, well, what about, I'd say, I say again my
What about?
last, all actions necessary, right? Protect and
Right.
preserve, meet mission critical needs. That's our left and right limits, and we will figure this out together. And it took us about a week to reposture the force
Mm-hmm.
because, once again, this was very different. This is a workforce that when there's a crisis, and a community, right? When there's a crisis,
Right.
they're packing their bags. They're coming into work. They're like, where do you
Right.
need me? I'm ready to go wherever. And at this point, we were telling them, hey, we need you to go home. Not everybody, right?
Right. Right.
Or else we can't meet that balance. But we need a lot of
Right.
you to go home. And when we said everybody, we meant everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a complexity in the workforce of uniformed government, civilian contractors,
Sure.
right? But they're all part of the team. and there's different rules and regulations as to what you can or can't do, but we
Hmm.
committed to figuring that out for everybody, right? So it took us about a week to get people convinced that this was the right thing to do, and then it took us probably another couple of weeks to really get people connected and to push tools down to the unclassified level and to
Hmm.
really get our feet underneath us, thinking about how we're going to do business differently. And once we got ourselves repostured, in my discussion with leadership and the team writ large, I said, I want us not only to survive this pandemic, I want us to use it as an opportunity to come out stronger and smarter and better, right? To think about doing things differently that we
Hmm.
hadn't done before. And I was pretty proud of the way that the team took that idea and really ran with it.
Right. I think COVID was like a shock to the system, not just as like our national system, but like the way that the intelligence community works, right? I mean, it was like, oh, wait a second, this is really difficult to do this on these networks, and what
Yeah.
are some other things we have? And I think, and I believe this for the last, I don't know, maybe 20 years, that the the unclassified production of intelligence is where things are moving, and I think that's pretty evident now. But
Well, and it really helped us. We
yeah.
benefited from having you know, a, a robust high side sort of network,
Hmm.
a decent collateral network, and an unclassified network. And we had already had resources to improve, already identified to improve some of our networks. We were about to focus on our collateral networks, but we shifted that to the unclassified, and we were able
Right.
to push tools down. And I think uniquely out of the intelligence community, the geospatial realm lends itself more, easier to do an
Hmm.
unclassified work than some of the other agencies, right?
Right.
And
Right.
we found processes, Nick. You won't find this surprising, but we found processes where we were taking unclassified data, we were moving it up to high side systems, doing
Right.
things to it. We were moving it back to unclassified systems and using that for dissemination. So there's a lot of
Right.
room for process improvement.
Sure. It still is. But I think today, um, people kind of get it, right? They're like, okay, yeah, this was kind of silly. And I actually had a podcast with Keith Mosbach, and he mentioned this phrase which is just stuck in my brain, is that there's a fetid. I can't even say the word. There's a fetish with classifying, over classifying things, right? Um,
Yeah,
but
I think it's
uh,
it's a it's a
it's funny.
natural reaction. Like when
Uh huh.
you're in the business of part of your business is protecting secrets, right? Stealing
Sure.
secrets and protecting secrets and
Sure.
providing information. So it's ingrained in you, like to make sure you are security conscious, and we never want to lose that, right? That's wise,
Hmm.
but we also shouldn't be afraid to question why we're doing things certain ways and to adapt how we do business, right? And every day, people should be saying, "How do we get better?"
Sure. Yeah. I was curious, if there was any moment or lesson learned like during that time that just really is just sticking with you, that pops to the top of your head.
Yeah, it was funny because as we were getting into the pandemic early days, um, thankfully, we had good communications between
Mhm.
other agencies. We were sharing um, best practices at the director level, deputy director, chief of staffs. We're talking, down throughout the organizations. Um, and one of the things that had come up early on was the McChrystal group had turned
Mhm.
to and put out some information on leading through something like a pandemic. And they came out with it's still, I think you can find it still on their website, and I think they may have turned it into something more formal. But I had already, I had worked for General McChrystal early days of doing counterterrorism, and so had Major General Charlie Cleveland, right, and a number of
Mhm.
folks throughout the organization. So as they were coming up with their guidance, we looked at it and we were like, check, we're doing that. Yep, we're doing that.
Right.
But it really showed the importance of not only communicating but over communicating, right, and
I love that.
staying connected.
Over communication is my thing. I believe you gotta just
Yeah,
you gotta. It just shows that you're comfortable and where you're at, that you can be wrong too when you're over communicating. But
yeah.
if you're keeping it flowing, that's actually one of
You
the
can be wrong, but it's okay to be
Mhm.
wrong also. And if you step in
Totally
an
fine.
environment where
Yeah.
people know, and I would tell people I learn something new every single day, sometimes from the most junior
Mhm.
person in the room. I'm also wrong every day. And once
Sure.
again, I would tell them, if you don't believe me, you can call my wife and she will tell you he is indeed wrong every day. But I try
Right.
not to be wrong about the same thing, right?
Sure.
But I think that connectivity and communications was a key to our success. And I think you're aware, Nick, that we were doing weekly virtual town halls. We were sending
Mhm.
out daily updates um, from myself, right, or from the leadership team out to the enterprise. And I think it allowed people to. We were very transparent about how we were
Mhm.
handling the disease, right? How we were safely and responsibly bringing people into workspaces to make sure we were taking care of force and families, right?
Right.
And we were also able to show people even at the unclassified level that they were still getting the mission done, and that was really important. And one of the things I started doing, I told people, hey, to get through this myself, I'm going to take time every day to laugh, and I'm going to take time every day to be human and to laugh. We would run different aspects of joking around at our ops intel near the end. And early on, we had repositioned General Cleveland over to work from the Pentagon, just spreading us
Mhm.
out. Plus, then we had senior presence in the Pentagon. And early on, I started a segment of our ops intel we called We will make a sailor out of you yet, Charlie Cleveland." And I would teach him nautical terms and he would banter back. And when it was the Army's birthday, he ran a segment, "We will make a soldier out of you, Bob Sharp." But taking time to laugh a little bit during
Right.
stressful times is important. And then to be human, I was doing daily buddy checks, and I would carve out time on my schedule to call
Mhm.
somebody I had worked with and I considered a friend, and check up on them and their families, but also talk about leading during a pandemic and sharing best practices. And then also it was good for me to check on how how the GWOT team was doing in continuing to provide support through the pandemic. And I would share feedback from those discussions with the enterprise during the next day's ops intel. And I think that connectivity, like hyper connectivity,
Mhm.
was really important. The second aspect I'd say is it allowed us to push the envelope in being creative and innovative.
Mm.
And you may recall this, that almost, really early in the pandemic, when we had gotten people repostured, the Department of Defense and the government said, "Hey, we need everybody's plans for how you're going to recover and reconstitute. Right? How do you bring people back
Right.
if this thing's over tomorrow? What's your plan for quickly reconstituting, recovering?" And we were starting to do that planning, and then
Mhm.
we checked ourselves and we said, "Hey, we said we're going to change, right? We said we will come out of this smarter and better, stronger. If we just plan on coming back and doing business the way we did before, we'll have
Mhm.
lost all that opportunity to learn." So our plan was called Reimagine, Reconstitute, Recover, the 3R plan, and it generated some great discussions because early on I was getting feedback from the workforce and from the leadership at all levels, and they said, "Hey, the team is really excited about the word reimagine, but they want to know what you mean about it. What do
Right.
you mean by that?" My response was, "No, what do we mean? Like at every level, right?
Right.
Everybody is empowered to reimagine, and that could be an admin process, an operational
Mhm.
process, anything. we came up with a way of looking at those ideas, evaluating them, and making sure that we adapted and made that part of the way we started doing business coming out of the pandemic.
Right. Well, I think, what sticks out to me about your story is one of the things that I've always, I think is the cornerstone of any good leader is humility. And I just think that you're a humble person. You've recognized that. I don't see that in a lot of a lot of leaders. Like, you could just tell that they think when they walk in the room, the sun and stars are there for them. But I think humility is very critical, and I think you exude that, right? You're not going in there saying, "This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it." You're saying, "I'm here to listen, learn. We'll make a good decision together." And I think that's what people really admire about you is you have that humility, and like you're as the director of a major intelligence agency to come in and listen to that lowest echelon person and learn from them. So I think that's a critical thing, and I think that's why people like you so much, Bob.
I appreciate that, Nick, and I always tell people I've never been burdened by brilliance. That's one of my strengths, is which is why I'm humble, because I need to be humble, because I'm not all that impressive, for one thing. And the other thing is, my strength is recognizing the strengths in other people, right, and helping them just achieve what they're doing, and team building. And I've always been fascinated and excited about working on teams. It's one of the things I really enjoyed about the culture at NGA. I lost count of the time. Every single time I would recognize somebody, right, and I'd say, "Hey, Nick, great job. I really appreciate that."
Sure.
To a person, they would say, "Hey, thanks, sir, but it wasn't me. It was the team." And it's a recognition of really our strengths, which it's not one individual. And then talking about humility as an important characteristic of leaders. At one time, I was the J2, the Intel Director for Special Operations Command, and it was my second year. And General GWOT, who's a phenomenal leader, was the commander there, and we were just having a session talking about leadership. And my deputy at that time is a good friend and one of the best leaders I've been around, Keith Lawless, United States Marine Corps, 30 years in the Corps, and then a senior civilian. And he said, "Hey, all the great leaders I've been around have 3 H characteristics. One is honor, right? It's never about, it's they will do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Right? They are people of honor. It's humility. It's like you said, it's never about them, it's about the team. And then it's humor. And humor, your attitude is something that you get to choose for yourself. There's so much about your day you don't get to choose, but your attitude you get to choose. And as a leader, well, as a person in general, but as a leader, certainly it's infectious. Right. Very in positive ways or negative ways. And General Votel had one of his leadership principles was be a happy leader. And when he said, when I tell people that, they kind of chuckle. He's like, no, I really mean it. I mean, be a happy leader, right? Because your energy transfers to your people, right? It sets the tone. So I try and remember that, throughout my day. And one of the leadership tips I give to leaders as they're stepping up in their roles is take time every day to walk around a little bit and interact with your people. And take time deliberately out of your day to make at least one person that works for you know how special they are, right? And that they're doing a good job. And at the end of the day, you could have like a horrible day, but if you do those two things on balance, you're going to have a good day every day.
I think that's interesting what you're saying about humor, because it seems to me that humor plays a critical role. The more serious the job is, or the more serious the role is. Like the SEALs are notorious for having this sick, sadistic sense of humor, which is great, right? Because you can't imagine being in the conditions that they have to work in. And I think it's the same for working in intelligence, right? Everything we do is critical and time sensitive and super important, and we try to be as detailed as humanly possible because we want to make sure that ultimately the people that are enacting on our information are have the best possible knowledge. And I think it's interesting, and I think probably eye-opening to some people that you mentioned humor as a key thing. I don't think it in a normal person walking the street thinks, oh, the director of an intelligence agency, yeah, he's probably a pretty funny guy. But I can attest, Bob does have a good sense of humor.
This is a great saying. Calm breeds calm, panic breeds panic, right? And that sort of mentality, and it really is. You see it in a lot of high-performing teams that are in stressful situations.
Mm-hmm.
There's a balance, right? I mean, you're focused when you're in those stressful situations, but sometimes just a little bit of humor can diffuse the stress, right? That's in the room. So during an op, being focused and everything is really important. And then in between, it's good to relax and recover. You mentioned the Navy SEALs. I worked with quite a few throughout my career, and there were two that were commander, deputy commander, and had known each other, grown up forever. And one of the things they always tried to do was sneak rocks into each other's rucksacks or like baggage and stuff. It was like an ongoing challenge that they had with each other.
Right. Yeah, make the pack a little bit heavier to carry around. That's a good one. We used to do that in the Army as well. But
I'm sure.
We'll say that the SEALs probably had bigger rocks. So I'll just throw that out there. So you talked about your career starting in that Cold War era, and then all the way through COVID, and kind of now we're back in this kind of same strategic warfare type of position. And I want to ask you about that more, based on current events a little bit later. But I'm curious about what are you up to now? So you leave the agency. I know you've had some things happening in your personal life that are add context. But what are you up to today, and what gets you out of bed now?
It's funny. What gets me out of bed every morning now is my Australian Shepherd. But because she's like an alarm clock, and she's getting old.
Mm-hmm.
She's like 15 years old now, and she's one of the pets my wife acquired. My wife had a knack of acquiring pets if I went on long deployments. I'd come back, and so she got the Australian Shepherd. I was 2 years unaccompanied over in Bahrain. But although she's getting old, in the morning she's a puppy again. She wants to go for a walk, and so that gets me up moving. I am a make your bed disciple of Admiral Bill McRaven. I had the pleasure of working for him directly as a SOCOM commander, and then also deploying with him out in Afghanistan. And as an career intel officer, I was always I've always been an early riser. I'm a morning person, like obnoxiously happy morning person. So getting up and
that is obnoxious. That's the most obnoxious. When people are so happy in the morning, and I can be like that sometimes, but I think for the most part, it's like I'm struggling.
It was
it takes me a second to get the wheels spinning.
At Office of Naval Intelligence, I was there, and we were having a family day, and one of my 06 commanders met my wife, and he said, "Hey, ma'am, is the Admiral like this every day?" And she said, "Yes, he is, and it can be exhausting." But what motivates me throughout the day? I like to tell people these days I'm dabbling, right? I work for me. I started the LLC B Sharp Global Solutions.
Love it.
My strategic vision is to help people who are trying to make the world better succeed. A shorter version of that is just to continue helping great people do great things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing a combination of some consulting with a number of the established companies. Right, I signed
Mm-hmm.
initially with West Exec Advisors and knew some of the people working with them, the other principals that I really liked. I stayed connected with St. Louis
Mm-hmm.
because I'm really passionate about what is going on in St. Louis.
It's
Um,
happening out there, isn't it?
yeah, leveraging the investment of the replacement construction, right?
Mm-hmm.
To the area is doing a great job of growing themselves as a leader in geospatial technology
Isn't that
research
interesting too?
talent.
Because I mean, St. Louis, NGA's been out there forever, but it
Yeah,
seems like this just getting a new building is like has made it. Wow, hold on a second. What is going on over here? And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think over the last decade, the more that the technology's improved and made it more accessible, I think people are like, oh, this is cool, and not to mention the information that can be derived in it, right? You're starting to see that more
Yeah.
businesses are leveraging GeoInt for different things, and it's really cool to see St. Louis kind of like grab a hold of it. And I know St. Louis has some issues. I was out there for the symposium was it a couple years ago, or was it last
It
year? It
was
might have been last year. Yeah,
last year,
last year.
and then
And
2 years before that.
the driver from the airport, he's like, "Oh, you guys are here for the conference. You're the only people that have been downtown in the last month." Um, but I think something like that could really spur innovation in the city and drive businesses there. I know that there's businesses that are like starting to invest more heavily there. So I think it's a great thing all around.
Yeah, so I think you're tracking. I'm a research fellow with University of Missouri St. Louis,
Mm-hmm.
the public university out there, and was helping them stand up a geospatial collaborative, and
Mm-hmm.
not only given certification and degree programs within the university, but then also using it as a hub for multidisciplinary research. And then the chancellor wants to help be a thought leader in K through 12, K through 12R,
Sure.
K through 16R
Mm-hmm.
developments. And so on the people side, and I'm passionate about people and future workforce generation and those things. So it keeps me connected out there. And then in between those things, I'm working with a bunch of smaller, great companies that are in the
Mm-hmm.
business and doing either some startups or some that have been in the business. I'm working with a great company called GOL. You may have
Oh
heard
yeah,
of.
I know them. I hear they're great. No, it's been great to have you, and obviously getting a chance to know you a bit more and learn from you. I'm kind of curious like that. You mentioned you're working with some startups. Shua, we've been around for a little bit. I wouldn't consider us quite a
I don't
startup.
consider you
But
a startup either.
yeah, we're more
I
like
think
yeah,
you're in transition though.
sure, absolutely, absolutely. But what's that like working with startups? That's like flipping the switch. That's day and night between, going from military service into, oh, I'm in the startup world now.
Yeah, it's been an education for me, for one thing.
Hmm.
I've been learning a lot, and I'm finding that I can have impact in ways that I couldn't while I was in uniform, which is exciting to me.
Hmm.
One of the things I really loved about being in the military was changing jobs every couple of years.
Right.
Right, it may be a little internal ADHD that I have, but I like constant change. And it was actually Keith Mosbach and some others who I'd been talking about
Hmm.
this next phase of my life that recommended that I carve out some time for startups, and it's exciting,
That's cool.
and I'm trying not take on too much and kind of spread the portfolio, so I'm helping out companies that are in different
Hmm.
aspects. But it's exciting to be on small teams that are kind of young in their journey, and to helping to advise them as to how they can be successful. And it's so I'm working with some companies that are doing remote sensing, some companies that are doing artificial intelligence, machine learning
Mm-hmm.
types of things, working with quantum computing company. And, it's
Yeah, cool
amazing
stuff.
the technology that's out there. And I think
Mm-hmm.
us as a nation and like-minded nations figuring out how we adopt new technologies in these emerging disruptive technology areas, and how we figure that
Mm-hmm.
out is at the core of strategic competition, right? Technology is just technology, and it can be used for good or evil, right? Throughout history,
Right.
we've demonstrated that. And I just think that there are some the proliferation of sensing, like knowing what's happening where, the
Sure.
availability of data sources, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence, machine learning, partnering with machines. All those things individually are game changing, but they don't exist individually either,
No.
right? They're interconnected, and we need to make sure we're in a race, which is
Mm-hmm.
which is why you're well aware that, while I was director, I issued a moonshot challenge. We stood up
Mm-hmm.
moonshot labs. We were very deliberate about harkening back to the '60s space race, because I think we're in kind of one of those times in history now where
Mm-hmm.
we're in a competition of consequence, one that we're not winning in every area, and it is in
Nope.
the best interest of the free world that we win.
100%. That's a great segue because I wanted to talk about some of the things that are happening in the world, and obviously the emergence of technology seems to be on everybody's mind.
Yeah, unmanned, right?
I mean, unmanned. Well, now that I don't, can we say unmanned anymore? I think it's uncrewed now. I don't know.
Uncrewed.
I don't even know. Whatever. UAS. Those are cool. Um, I'm curious to know like what your perspective is on some of the things you've seen now working with startups and working in the military of like what do you think the next phase of artificial intelligence is? I think in my perspective, I think AI is going you mentioned that convergence of technology, right? It's a compound growth of of new technology all happening at the same time, right? It's just getting better and better every year, and it's getting better at getting better every year. Um, I think there's so many things that are beyond what we can even figure out between the two of us. I think there's things that are just going to be like, what? They're going to be mind blowing. But what are some interesting things that you've witnessed or that you can kind of see on the horizon in as far as technology is concerned?
It's, to me, the easy one that's already occurring at some level, but we're just
Hmm.
scratching the surface of the utility of it, is just partnering with machines and automating, things that our people
Hmm.
do right now. And I can tell you that when I came to NGA, there had been some sort of disruptive changes from my predecessor on trying to move down that path of becoming more data enabled and digital and partnering with
Hmm.
machines. And there was still, I wouldn't say suspicion, but skepticism, I guess would be the right word, right?
Right.
But as soon as you start to show people that you can change the way we do business workflows, and what used to take somebody 8 hours takes them 30 minutes, they become
Hmm.
believers right away. And that's in everything we do. So I think the the early opportunities are just in that automation and continually looking at
Sure.
processes and thinking how we do things faster, smarter, better. And then the next step, I think, is looking at that from an integrated fashion, right? And it's one of the things you and I have talked about before, and I talked
Hmm.
to a lot of people about this. I'm excited about not only what individual companies are doing, but what they perhaps could and should be doing together,
Sure.
like partner to figure out things
Yeah.
for the nation. And I think we need to create that environment. That also,
Mhm.
once again, why we were talking about the 60s space race, right? Because we
Mhm.
found a way of coming together between government, industry, academia, nonprofits, international partners, right, to figure things out. And I
Right.
think that's going to be a key aspect of how we stay at the forefront of
Mhm.
figuring out how we can leverage some of these technologies to greatest effect.
I think you're definitely onto something in terms of getting companies to work together, because you see a lot of these AI companies that are popping up now. Um, they have different types of data and different, different ways that they work with data, different standards that they use for their own stuff, different ways of collecting the data, different ways of distributing the data. But it seems like a lot of these companies, if you could just smash them together with two other ones, they would just be like, the things that are the art of the possible. Um, uh, I think I once heard that creativity is really just the art of putting two things that are dissimilar together. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to technology, creativity is actually going to be the thing that gets us um, to the promised land. I want to say promised land gets us where we
Yeah.
want to go with this stuff.
And
Um,
I think creativity, right, and innovation
mhm,
is a comparative advantage that we have as
absolutely.
a
That's our
free
innovation
society.
is, yeah, the United States. I mean, look, we have our problems. We know that. But there's not a day or a week that goes by that um, I don't read about some new thing, a new company that started, or some new technology that's coming up that's interesting, and I try to read a lot of news. Um, and I'm always seeing it, like, okay, new company here, and that is our strength. You're right, like, just
Yeah,
being able to the fuel to the fire, right? It's like if you don't have any wood going into the fire, it's gonna burn out. But that's the fuel, is the innovation. So I think the more we lean into that, the better.
that's right. And our strength is our people, right, and our partnerships. And on the
Right.
partnership side, I'd always tell people we not only have good friends, we have friends that are really good, from an
Hmm.
international partnership. But part of that partnership is working together between commercial, private,
Hmm.
public, um, at a different level. In this, creating the environment where we can think through things. Two things based on just um, following through on a couple things you said there. One was that creativity, like combining things, was one of the things I really loved about the Trident Spectre
Hmm.
demonstration series was the technology tent. And it wasn't the individual technologies. It's when technologists are in close proximity there and they start saying, "Hey, I think we could combine these things." Right? That I think is very
Yeah.
powerful, and it's part of who we are as a nation. Right? And I may have shared with you this story, but at one point, I was working at a combatant command, right, and the four
Hmm.
star general had all the 3 stars and all their staff sitting around uh, big arched map, right? And because
Hmm.
everything's geospatial, and we're talking about some of the challenges we face. And he turned to all his leaders and he said, "We come from the land of Thomas Jefferson. We will outthink these sons of bitches." And it's time that we create that environment where we just unleash the creative genius in our people, right? And
Hmm.
challenge them to help us make sure we are at the forefront of figuring out how we adopt and adapt using these emerging technologies, and how we leverage technology to great effect. So I think we're up to the challenge.
Hmm.
It's just if we're not successful, it's because we're holding ourselves back.
Yeah. Well, um, there's a lot that can hold us back, especially over the last few years. What are your thoughts on? Well, before we get into like kind of what's happening in the world, um, I was curious to know, you actually served under President Trump and also President Biden. And I'm not asking, this isn't a political question here. This is just, was there a shift in tone that you noticed from one executive to the other? Like what were the major differences that you noticed from your role as the director? And like how did, I'm curious to know how that impacts things, because as you hear this, um you've heard this term, the deep state, right? Which is just this cabal of bureaucrats that are supposedly controlling government. And there's a bit of that, right? It's a big government. But I'm just curious to know, like, when the president changes, right? Is there how does that impact something like an intelligence agency? Like, is the president coming in there saying, "Oh, you're all wrong, Bob. We're doing it this way now," or is it?
Yeah,
Or are they listening to you?
That's a good question, and certainly throughout my career, I worked for a bunch of different presidents, right?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and through different administrations, as you become more senior, you feel it a little differently. You recognize that you may be either directly involved in some of those changes or not. And more so than a president changing, it's also the change of cabinet members, right? It's a changing of the team, and
Right.
At multiple different levels. The continuity, though, that occurs, some of that occurs just by the challenges that we're facing don't change, right?
Right.
Just because a new president comes in, it doesn't mean like the world hasn't changed. From a
Sure.
national security perspective, there may be different perspectives as far as priorities, right? And things, but those aren't normally, I haven't experienced those as really drastic changes, especially being within the intelligence community, when the demand to know what's happening where to make informed decisions
Sure.
is kind of universal, right? It's
Right.
so, I lived my career, putting personal political leanings on the side, or at least, keeping
Sure.
them close to my heart. And when the election's done, I pray for whoever is in leadership to be successful, right? Because it's our nation and our planet. And I focus on making
with you.
sure we provide those individuals the best information, continue to provide those individuals the best information to help them make informed decisions, right? The
I
big
think
change,
that's.
though, Nick,
Mhm.
sometimes is how people consume information, right? That's
Sure.
not unique at that
Mhm.
level. It kind of happens at every level when you're in this business. There was a very big difference when I started as the intel commander for the Joint Intel Center at Central Command. At
Mhm.
first, I worked for General Petraeus, and then I worked for General Mattis. Very different humans, right? The way they process information was completely different, and you have to be able to adapt to understand like how they what their requirements are, how you can provide them
Mhm.
information that's going to be in the right format at the right time to help them make decisions. So I think that's the biggest change when
Right.
somebody comes in, is
Okay.
figuring out how they consume information, what are the right
Mhm.
decision points where you can have impact, and that sort of adaptation.
That's pretty interesting. I also think it's very patriotic as well. I think it's probably one of the biggest misunderstandings of the intelligence community is that there's a lot of people that, just like you, they want the president to be successful. And I think the president's a polarizing figure. I don't care who it is, because half of our country votes one way, the half that votes the other way. And I don't know about you. I mean, I'm sure you're the same way, but I, you know, I want the president to be successful. I mean, look, I'm not voting for Joe Biden. I don't think there's no mystery there. But I want him to be successful, as in I want him to make good decisions. I want him to have wins because it's good for the country. And yeah, I
Good for
don't
the
agree with
country,
him
good for the
politically.
planet, right? I don't want
Exactly.
them to
Good.
fail.
Yeah. And the crazy part, of course, is that this sense of patriotism, which is that you want America to do good no matter what, has even that's become political and polarizing now, which is mind blowing, right? Um, this there's been a shift to, I don't know, in the last 5 years. It seems to me, at least on the far left, a shift to denounce patriotism, which is to say, yesterday I saw, the Palestinian flag. They took down the American flag. They put up the Palestinian flag on a college campus. I think it was NYU or something in New York, right? Look, crazy stuff happens. There's crazy people. They're usually a fringe minority, but it seems like it's growing. It seems like that anti-American sentiment is growing, and I never want that to be in the intelligence community. I want the intelligence community to actually believe in what this country stands for, and I think for the most part that it does.
I think it does. It is something that no matter what your political affiliation is and your
Mm-hmm.
beliefs, we all raise our hand and take the same oath, right, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all
Right.
enemies, foreign and domestic. So I think it is something that unites us. The other thing I think about our business, I think I may have shared this with you. I call it my great American theory, right? I
Mm-hmm.
truly believe that people in our profession don't wake up in the morning saying, I hope I suck today and I do something meaningless. They
Right.
generally, want to do something that really matters, and they want to do it exceptionally well. And it's important for us to keep that in our minds, right? So that we assume good intent with our colleagues and coworkers. And yeah, I do think that at this time there is disproportional airing or voice given to both extreme left and extreme right,
Mm-hmm.
based off of the way news reports, what is being covered, and then also the way that the internet kind of functions. I think a
Sure.
majority of I think there's more similarity than dissimilarity in beliefs, especially on the what issues need to be challenged, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into discussion and debating, like how do you attack those problems? There's definitely a difference in how we prioritize things, how we legislate or don't legislate and those things. But it's one of the things I love about taking Ubers around is, especially in the DC area, is I get to
Mm-hmm.
interact with a lot of sometimes like first generation
Yeah.
Americans, right? Who really are very appreciative of being in this country and what this country represents. Or, from time in military and traveling around the world, you get a good appreciation for, uh, you know, despite faults that we have, right? And no country is perfect, right? We got a lot of positive things that go along with being a citizen of the United States of America, right? And if you don't think so, you should go to some of these other countries and see what it might look from a different perspective. And
Yes. Try holding drag queen story hour inside of Gaza. It's not going to go very well.
well, the fact that
They're
we
not going
can
to be very tolerant.
the fact that we can be critical about our country is a blessing.
Absolutely. The freedom of speech. It seems to be more and more. I think I was listening to Joe Rogan the other day. They're talking about a European country that is really, they want to lock people up for hate speech, and this is a very European thing. I think that's why when this country was founded, they said, no, we're not going to do that. This is, you can talk here. Elon Musk is getting into hot water with the Australian Prime Minister because he's allowed this video that is violent, does depict violence, but it's real. It's a real video, and they want to. One of the officials in Australia was like, "Oh, we got to throw Elon in jail." I was like, "Okay," but I think you got to freedom of speech is there's a reason it's the First Amendment. It's the most powerful thing in the world. It's how you hold people accountable. It's how you let bozos air out their dumb ideas, and you can identify who the bozos are. We can all be a bozo sometimes, right? Me included. But I think like this moment in time is a time when we really need real leaders that believe in America, believe in the United States, believes in the First Amendment and these values. And by the way, that means that if you want to, raise the Palestinian flag, go for it. But don't expect don't expect my adulation or anyone's adulation, and certainly don't expect anyone to say that you're right. Right? It's just it seems wild what's happening on some of these college campuses. What
It is, but
Yeah, go
they're
ahead.
college students, right? And you can
Sure,
remember when.
sure, absolutely, absolutely, and that's the X factor. And I think sometimes in the news, they take it a little bit too serious. It's like, yeah, well, I was done when I was in college too.
Yeah, and then they
I made some
cover
dumb
where
decisions.
things are going bad. I think if
Sure,
you took a holistic,
sure,
don't want to go to a campus where they're having peaceful
hmm
protests and dialogue, but that's
right,
happening in our country as well. And
sure,
we went through this also earlier during the pandemic and in some of the riots after
right,
George Floyd,
right,
right? And one of the things when I was, I was still doing, weekly town halls, and I
hmm
told my team, just so you know where I stand on things, I completely support the right to protest in this country, peacefully
hundred
protest,
percent,
right? I do not support the right to destroy property,
or
and I
block traffic. Can I just say that blocking traffic is one of the worst things? That is not peaceful protest. If you're
I
stopping people from getting to work on time or picking up
I'll
their
put that
kids,
at a different level though than like busting windows and stealing
yeah,
things,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely. But I have
The
to
other thing
say,
is
yeah,
I support law enforcement. I come from a family
sure,
of law enforcers. I don't support law enforcement officers who break the law, right? But the percentage
absolutely.
of law enforcement officers that break the law is small compared to those that don't.
hmm
Very small. The percentage of protesters that loot, right, and destroy is
hmm
very small compared to those who are trying to actually protest peacefully and use their rights to do so. And it's important for us to keep that in perspective. It's smaller numbers on the
hmm
fringes that people point at, and then so I would tell
Well,
people
I think,
whenever you say
I think they're,
all blank are blank, you're probably
yeah,
wrong,
yeah, yeah, yeah. If you're
right?
saying all, if these overwhelming terms, I will say that there, what was that? After the George Floyd riots, there was, what was it, $20 billion worth of damage done to these cities. So I don't think that that was a fringe minority. I think there was a fuel of hatred there that was causing a lot of people to do damage in the riot and loot and do all these things.
I still think it was a
Um,
minority of protesters, number wise.
sure. I mean, maybe, yeah, maybe in the totality of it all. But I don't think that that's a helpful way to think about it, right? There was this term, mostly peaceful protesters. Well, that doesn't that doesn't matter when the building's on fire and there's um, you know looting happening. It's like, okay, well, I don't know. Um,
Yeah, to the owner of
it
that business, it doesn't really equate, right?
right. You could say that October 7th was a mostly peaceful day. Oh, except for those 1,200 Israelis that were killed. Um, so I did want to ask you about maybe not necessarily that, but about some of these conflicts that are happening in the world and like what your general thoughts are on how we're handling them. And we could start with that, with Israel and Palestine. Man, I feel like I've I'm like having deja vu. Like there seemed to be a period when Israel and Palestine were okay. Like it was, oh, okay, things have kind of calmed down there, whatever. And then obviously October 7th happened. Um, and then it has kicked up the hornet's nest of, you know, Lebanon with Hezbollah, and obviously Iran now shooting whatever they're trying to shoot at Israel, drones and missiles and things like that. What are your thoughts on how we're handling it, and from an intelligence perspective? What are your general thoughts on what's happening there?
Yeah, a couple thoughts on it. You know, I would tell the team when I was still director of NGA and prior commands as well. Hey, the good news is you have job security. The bad news is you have like way too much job security, right? With
Right.
the complexity of some of the security challenges that are facing the world right now. And one of the dimensions that are important, or the aspects of the challenge that we're facing, are they're not local problems, right? There's no such thing as local problems anymore. They cross national boundaries and regional boundaries, and they have this global dimension to them. Nor do they exist in isolation. So some of the security challenges that we're facing really are interconnected in complex ways. Right? So
Sure.
it's hard for us to fully understand them. And then there's a desire for simple solutions to complex problems. Right.
That's
Going,
yeah, man. That is it right there, isn't it?
yeah. So
There's so much in nuance, you know. Like, anyways, go on.
yeah. So it's really easy to criticize, right, when you're looking at some of these challenges, and but it's really hard to come up with what anybody can do just to completely address and diffuse the situations, right?
Right.
So from the intelligence community, I think the community is doing a good job in collecting, understanding, warning, those sorts of things. Warning is a tough job, and you saw the Israelis be very self-critical on themselves, right? Which is just part of the business, right? Going back and thinking about how good were you, how not good were you, and how do you get better at things. But I'm a optimist by nature, so I'm pretty happy with the fact that the conflict right now hasn't spread further, right? That even though they're interconnected, as you said, it's really, really complex because it starts to evoke emotion and in problems or areas where you could be in a hot conflict in a heartbeat as well. And I'd say right now, the conflict is fairly contained, but I think that's a day-to-day thing, right? Where it could change in a moment's notice.
I've always had this this thought about these types of I don't know if you want to call them wars that we have with these other countries, but you mentioned the term hot conflict, which to me is two countries had, boom boom going at it, right? I think most people agree with that. That's what that is. But when we're dealing with countries like Iran, and they're funding things, right? Now, check this out, right? They're funding Hezbollah, they're funding Hamas, they're funding these terrorist organizations. Who knows what they were doing with ISIS or whatever. At the same time, we're funding Ukraine, right? And I'm not putting those on parity. Ukraine was invaded by Russia, and they have certainly a right, a will, and it should defend themselves. But isn't that like, it's like we use the way money is used to enact war, but somehow could keep the person that gave the money, oh, sorry, we just gave them money. We're not actually into this. We just gave them $200 billion worth of stuff. We're not actually in this war. And I don't understand how any world leader could be like, not hold that country accountable, right? If we're attacked, let's say, 9/11 is a perfect example, right? We were attacked on 9/11. We know for a fact that a lot of those terrorists were trained by, or at least funded by Saudi Arabia, or people in Saudi Arabia, I should say, not necessarily tied to the government. I don't know enough about that. But it doesn't seem like there was any accountability there. Like what happened there? And at the same time, Iran can fund Hamas and Hezbollah, and we don't hold them accountable. I don't understand that. And then, here we are funding Ukraine justifiably. I'm for funding that to the extent that it needs to be. I'm for peace first, but to get there, sometimes you need to have a little muscle. But this, I don't know. There's a discrepancy to me between, oh, it's just money and boots on the ground. Like, to me, it's like the same. Like, $200 billion is a lot of money. I mean, that's a lot of money worth of stuff that we're giving to Ukraine. And I think I had this conversation 2 years ago, whatever, but are we not involved? Like, are we not involved in a war right now? We're just luckily not sending our sons and daughters, especially in Ukraine. Like, what are your thoughts on this crazy kind of economic funding of warfare?
Yeah, that's the complexity of how you provide support, right? And you can probably recall early days of after Russia invaded Ukraine, and some of the discussion and debate as to what sort of support would or wouldn't be provided, and a discussion and debate as to what sort of weapon systems would be okay, right, to provide, and discussion and debate on, is it a defensive weapon system? Is it an offensive weapon system? So I think those are the right discussions to have, right? Those are the right, that's why it's so hard to pass support for funding in some of the stipulations. And that's our democracy in operation, right? Is getting into those details on that. But I guarantee you that it would be a whole level of different discussion if all of a sudden we said, hey, we're going to send forces in there, right? I agree that they're related, right?
But if I'm Russia, this is the part I don't. If I'm Vladimir Putin, right? Vladimir Putin, who we all agree is, he's obviously he has support from his people. I know we tend to make these comic booky expressions of people, but he's evil. He's an evil human. I mean, just look at what he's done over his lifetime. How is he not saying, yeah, we're at war with the United States? Like, how is that any different, right? I just don't. That's so much. We're giving them so much stuff. Like, there seems to be, like, that's a provocation beyond just, the norm. That's 200. I don't know how much money we've given them at this point. It's probably $300 billion or something like that worth of.
There's been a lot of funding
support
and equipment that have gone in there, but
yeah.
Russia is also receiving equipment, right, from other countries, and we don't feel that we're at war with them. So I do think it's the complexity of what is conflict, what's competition, what's conflict, what war is, and it's kind of a continuum, and I think that that we've decided we're comfortable in doing certain things and not doing other things, right? Which continually gets evaluated and reevaluated. And you're right. Sometimes we are critical of support that Russia would receive, but we're throwing rocks from a glass house, right? When we forget that we were doing the same thing with Ukraine.
Well, we also support Russia, by the way. Just if you look in their missiles, they have components from Texas Instruments and all sorts of American-made components inside of their weaponry. That gets sourced through third-party countries and makes its way, trickles in through non-attributable sourcing. But we 100%, in a weird kind of way, also are providing stuff for Russia. you're mentioning China here without saying China, but obviously China is a critical, uh, the most realistic, I think, threat to the United States over the next 50 to 100 years. I mean, you just look at what they're doing, from buying farmland next to our military installations to walking thousands, tens of thousands of Chinese nationals across our southern border, which is happening. Like, they have their own Chinese camps and stuff like that, through, that surpass the Darien Gap down in Central America and make their way up through, up to California. Not to mention the amount of Chinese nationals that are in our universities. Their known Belt and Road Initiative, their entire strategy for stealing our intellectual property. I mean, this is a country that is, got bad intentions. What are your thoughts on China's, like, what could we do as short-term thinkers? Like, I want to say this because our leaders, they're there for 4 years. The president of the United States is there for 4 years, maybe 8 if they're lucky. But this President Xi guy, he's not leaving, right? He's going to be around in 20 years, 30 years. And so they can enact these kind of long-term strategies. And that's what the Belt and Road Initiative really is all about. It's about flexing this economic muscle in parts of the world, to gain influence and control, and ultimately, to dominate those markets and pull that money back to China. What are your thoughts on China? What are your thoughts on? We could go more into semiconductors in Taiwan, but what are your general thoughts on China?
Right. I think that is our pacing competitor, right? And it's just as with other competitions, when it's nation, it's not the citizens of that nation, it's the government, right? And
Sure.
the different world views that are represented, between China and what we believe in as a people, right? That are fundamentally at odds with each other. So that's at the heart of competition of consequence I talked about, and that's where I focused with the with director's intent when I was a director of NGA, was to let people know that we're in a competition of consequence, and it's not a tomorrow competition; it's a ongoing competition. As a matter of fact, we've probably been in the competition longer than we even realized, right? As we largely focused and concentrated on trying to cooperate and partner with China, thinking that they would be something that they're not, right? As a communist party. So I think that is at the core of our competition. That's the core of, like, protecting information and intellectual property, and that's at the core of figuring out how we make sure that we don't lose the race for developing, implementing, setting the rules for how these new disruptive technologies are going to be used, right, within the world. So, I mean, that's where we need to be focused.
As a Navy admiral,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on Taiwan? Obviously, the waterways there are the game, right? That's the game. What are your thoughts on, if something were to happen, should the United States defend 100%, boots on the ground, defend Taiwan? How critical are these semiconductors to the United States over the next, 50, 100 years? Is that the threshold? Is that, oh, they're going into Taiwan, that's it, we're there? Maybe not boots on the ground. Maybe we have flippers on the ground. Maybe that's what we'll have there.
Well, I think, one of the things is, you fund and you field militaries and support them for two reasons. One, first and foremost, to prevent conflict.
Sure.
Right? And then second, to win decisively if called upon to do so. So I do think that it is of significant national interest for the U.S. and for a number of nations for China not to invade Taiwan. Right, that would be something
Hmm.
that would require some level of response, and whole of government sort of response, and that we should not be precluding military options as part of that. What we're thinking about, what we're planning for. Um, and it would depend on the situation. But it first and foremost, we need to make sure that every day that China's waking up and saying, "Hey, it's today we do something like this," they
Right.
say, "No, today is not a good day to do that." And you talk about the
Right.
Navy and the maritime sort of aspect of the
Hmm.
competition that we're in. A few years ago, right before I took over NGA, there was a Chinese naval admiral who was part of their think tanks and part of
Hmm.
their strategy division that had come out openly and said, critical of the United States and our resolve, and his comments, the gist of his comments were, I don't think the U.S. is as strong as people think they are militarily and
Mm.
in their resolve to protecting this sort of the waterways out here in the South China Sea. And he suggested that maybe they should test that resolve by sinking an aircraft carrier or two.
Mm.
And at that point, when I was speaking on different platforms, I would talk about these comments, and I said I take that personally, right? Because
Sure.
that's
Absolutely.
not two big chunks of steel. That's
A lot of humans.
5,000, 10,000
Hmm.
shipmates, right? So we need to make sure that if they're waking up and they're saying, "Hey, we should test the U.S. resolve, maybe sink a carrier," that their decision process, like today, would not be a good day, and for us to make them
Hmm.
say today would not be a good day means we need to have a strong and capable force, right? And if they make the mistake in saying today was a good day, we need to have the capability to quickly make them realize that today was not a good day, right? So that needs to
Hmm.
be the focus of where we're investing and the capabilities that we're building in the Navy and the Joint Force. Right.
I think it's such a wild situation, isn't it? It's just like this one company on this one little island is making the things that power our modern, everything in the modern world, and the next company making semiconductors is so far behind. Uh, it's not even. It's a crazy thing. It all comes down to this one little island. If you look at map, people get a beautiful map behind you. I love it. It's
Yep.
gorgeous. It comes down to this one little island that could really be the catalyst for things. Also, if you're working at the Taiwan, was it Taiwan Semiconductor Company, whatever it's called, TSC. I might be wrong about the name of the company, but are you thinking, oh man, if the Chinese come in, I'm gonna put in my best effort tomorrow? Like I have the feeling there's got to be some of the people in Taiwan probably would be pretty opposed to the Chinese coming in saying make chips for us. Um, Again, but if you have a gun to your head, you're gonna do what you're gonna do. Uh, but I don't think they're gonna just go willingly into work the next day and say, "Sure, China, you can have whatever you want." There's got to be a little bit of that, and then not to mention our response to how we would, attack China, essentially, or should I say, attack how we would react to something like that. China is reliant on us, and we're relying on them in this weird type of this weird type of dance. Like I think Walmart is like the most popular store in China or something like that. Um, and obviously, we get a lot of goods from China. Um, so it's just this crazy. It's just crazy that all these entangled relationships from trade um, can kind of fall into play here on this one little island, and and their desires to take back the island. Um, it's just It's wild to me. It just seems like
Well,
the most
in their
wild
mind, it's
scenario.
not right. In their mind, it's not taking back. It's part of China.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's theirs. It belongs to us. It's mine.
Yeah, but
And you
I had I did not visit Taiwan until I was out of the military, and
Hmm.
I visited just a little bit over a year ago. I went out with the German Marshall Fund think tank
Mhm.
out of Harvard, and I was part of a U.S. European delegation with 5
Mhm.
delegates from each, and we met with the president, and we met with cabinet members, and so I learned a lot while I was out there, right? And certainly bolstering their own
Anything you
defensive
can share?
capabilities. I mean, bolstering their own defensive capabilities, right? So that
Right.
they're not taken over by military means is certainly
Mhm.
something that they are interested in, that we are interested in.
Hmm. That's
And then going
I just
back to
think crazy.
semiconductors, I mean,
Yeah.
we need to be looking at where we have vulnerabilities in
That's a
things that
massive
we
vulnerability.
purchase, yeah, things that we
I mean,
produce,
massive.
materials, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost mind-boggling that that it got to this point where that company is just so far ahead. I mean, we don't have the science, we don't have the engineers, we don't have the trained labor to produce, the quality and numbers of these semiconductors. Um, it's like, man, come on, Elon, we need you to figure something out here. Get something rolling, but we're way behind.
And then you say the complexities of the relationships. I think a lot
Mhm.
of nations are starting to realize that what at one point looked like a really good business deal in
Right.
partnering with the Chinese has longer term negative consequences. Right. So
Sure.
I think there's a
They want
growing
conformity, you know?
realization of this. And
Mhm.
I was with one of our most valued partners and talking about maritime infrastructure, and one of them said to me, I'm sorry to say that our business community has bartered us into a very precarious position
Mm.
because
Yeah.
of some of the deals that were made there. But the good thing is people are starting to realize that it's there's some challenges, right, as opposed to being having blinders on.
Mhm. You mentioned, nuance earlier. I mean, nuance is really what it's all about, I think what's cool about about podcasts in general is that you can kinda talk through these things a little bit and kinda get more detail as to, "Okay, why is that an issue?" I think a lot of people don't understand, at least in the United States, what's happening, like, why is Taiwan an issue? I think if you ask the average person on the street, they'd be like, "Huh? Why?" But it's a very simple explanation, really. It's just there is some nuance there, and obviously, any response that, um, we would have to a potential Chinese, takeover would be a nuanced require nuanced thinking, and it seems to me like a lot of things in the news or whatever, they're so simple, right? It's just everything's so simplified and made to be digestible, but the world is complicated. There's a lot of nuance there. You gotta know what's going
Yeah,
on.
right. It's interesting you should say that because in with some of the European nations that were part of our delegation, we were having the same sort of
Mhm.
discussion. And
Right.
how do you raise the awareness that Taiwan is important? That Taiwan
Right.
isn't some small island off the coast of China. That Taiwan
Mhm.
is a liberal democracy that
Mhm.
is in potential risk, right? And what it means to the world, and how once again it's not a local problem, right?
Mhm.
The complexity of it crosses regions and really has global implications.
Yeah. Um, Super cool. Bob, I really appreciate you being on and chatting with me. I think you are one of the treasures of the geoint community, I should say. And it sounds like, you have a lot of experience as an all source, targeting and kind of these different types of these different types of roles. So you're not just, I couldn't just pigeonhole you into geoint. You are a generalist, Bob. See how we got to the generalist.
I'm a generalist. I'm a special generalist and a general specialist.
Very cool. Well, Bob, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Great to have you. And looking forward to maybe one day we do this in person in the studio here. That'll be a lot of fun.
That'd be great.
Very good. Well, cool. Appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. This is the NDS Show.